Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is our last class for American literature in the 19th century. Now we are going to talk about the second part of the book, which is the period from 1840 to 1870. Okay, this is a kind of a background or introduction for American literature in the 19th century. Okay, so American literature began to flourish as never before during the years 1840 to 1870. For the first time, a genuinely distinctive form of national expression began to emerge with the appearance of a new generation of writers. Earlier, authors like Irving, Cooper, Bryant had proved the United States artists could create work worthy of respect, but their writing often reflected strong European influences. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in 1837, "We have listened too long to the country muses of Europe, and we will walk on our feet. We will work with our own hands, and we will speak our own minds." So in this paragraph, the thing that is emphasized here is the idea of how we become Americans, okay? Like, what are the things that we should do to be American, okay? And these are examples of how the American writers move totally from the European influences to the American setting. Emerson's call for independence was prophetic. A few years after he spoke, some of the greatest classical American literature began to appear. Indeed, so many of them crowded into the 1950s that the period has been variously called Americans' Golden Day, the flowering of New England and the American Renaissance. So again, and this period also sometimes is called the American Renaissance, okay? So the 19th century is the century of the American Renaissance. Okay, during a brief 5-year 1850 to 1855, many of the most enduring of the American books appeared. And these are the most important books that are or that were published in the 19th century. Emerson's Representative Men, Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, Melville's Moby Dick, and Hawthorne's The House of the Seven Gables, Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Hawthorne's the Blithedale Romance, and Melville's Period, and Thoreau's Walden, and Whitman's The Leaves of Grass. Okay, so these are some of the works that are published at that time. In order to understand and appreciate the literature of this period, one must first examine the climate that produced the dominant philosophy of the time, transcendentalism. And this is very important. Transcendentalism is the philosophy that emerged in the 19th century. Since America's earliest years, there flourished a native relish for intellectual compact. Out of political criticism came reforms that led to self-government. Religious debates had been carried on from the moment of the first settlement in the 1600s down into the 19th century. What began as an argument over minor points of Puritan dogma had become by the 18th century sometimes called the Age of Enlightenment, an outright challenge to the dominance of Puritanism. The Quakers, unlike the Puritans, held the individual did not need a minister to meditate between themselves and God, but could know the deity directly through the inner light. Okay, so here this is very important because in this paragraph we talk about the shift from the religious dogmatism, okay, the Puritan dogma, into a more secular world, okay, or not secular, but more like, you know, the religion moves from the church and from the priest to the people themselves, okay, and that's why, you know, the Age of Enlightenment is the age of movement from the religious dogmatism and religious, you know, fanaticism. Okay, and the Quakers are example of how, you know, religious people started to change from being, you know, like Puritans who are very strict and religious. And they tried to emphasize that the individual did not need a minister to meditate or mediate between themselves and God. Okay. These and other beliefs lay behind the gradual displacement of Puritan by by Unitarianism. Okay, so here we have, in the 19th century, we have a shift from Puritanism to Unitarianism. Okay, now what is Unitarianism? Unitarianism derived its name from its rejection of a belief in the Trinity in favor of a belief in the unitary God. What does that mean? This means that they don't believe in the Trinity, or the God, the Son, and the soul, or the Father, the Son, and the soul, the three things, the Trinity. And they believe in the unitary God. That means, or this means that God is one, okay? So that's why they are called Unitarian or Unitarianism, because they believe that God is one and Jesus is just a human being. It's very similar to, or is very close to Islam, by the way. And it rejected the Calvinistic notion of original sin and determinism in favor of beliefs in the basic goodness and innate free will of individual. So also the Unitarianism, okay, believe that human beings have the basic goodness and the innate free will of the individual. Unlike, the Puritans or the Calvinist notions of the original sin, because in the Puritan dogma, they believe that we are responsible for our fathers and grandfathers' sins. So Adam's main sin, that he and his wife fall from paradise to the earth, and this sin we are responsible for in the Puritan belief. But in the Unitarianism, they say that no, we have basic goodness and free will of the individual. By the time that Emerson went to Harvard Divinity School, it was Unitarian, and the Boston church in which he became a minister was Unitarian. So simply Emerson, one of the most famous writers in the 19th century, got his education in Unitarian schools and churches. But even Unitarianism was restrictive for Emerson, and he resigned his ministry in 1832 because he could not, in good conscience, administer the Christian sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Carrying with him many of the Unitarian beliefs, Emerson began in search for a philosophy in which he could place his faith. Transcendentalism was partly borrowing and partly his own invention. So simply after Ralph Waldo Emerson departed Unitarianism or the Unitarian Church, he created his own philosophy, which is called transcendentalism. Okay. Transcendentalism. What does transcendentalism mean here? Transcendentalism is, as the name implies, okay, that's the definition of transcendentalism, is a belief that the transcendent or the spiritual reality, rather than the material world, is the ultimate reality. So they favor the spiritual over the material, okay? And the transcendental reality can be known not by the rational faculty or logic, but by intuition or mystical sights. And this is very important. So, because reason can be reached through rational faculty or logic, but in transcendentalism, they focus on intuition and mystical insight, meaning that they focus on the spiritual, the feelings, the connection, okay? The something that has to do with the spiritual, and that's why it is very important. But all people are open to this higher knowledge, and thus transcendentalism is a philosophy of individualism and self-reliance, okay? So, and this is very important also because individualism, because they glorify the individual. They believe that every person has a potential to be good and he has a free will, okay? And self-reliance suggests that everyone must rely on him or herself. And that's what we mean by self-reliance. We should not depend on the church. We should not depend on the society. We should not depend on anything else. We should depend on ourselves. Okay. Traits that had always been treasured in the American frontier society. Through Emerson's friend and his one-time live-in handyman, expressed his independence characteristically. And here, this is Thoreau, one of the writers that is, who represents the transcendentalism. He said, "I would rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself. Look, I, myself, okay, then be crowded on a velvet cushion, okay? And here crowded versus, so I, myself versus crowded. I versus society, the individual versus society. So the most important thing is the individual. No writer of the American classic period escaped the influence of transcendentalism. Even those who attacked transcendentalism, transcendental thought, like Hawthorne and Melville, were affected by it. Okay, now reform. Widespread feelings of self-sufficiency and trust in the judgment of others led to the establishment of the utopian communities that, that experiments with new ideas in cooperative living. The most famous was Book Farm, established in 1841 by some members of the Transcendental Club. Brook Farm attracted many of the leading writers of the day, including Nathaniel Hawthorne and Margaret Fuller. All members of the community shared in the work on the farm, drew similar pay, and participated in the cultural and intellectual life. Hawthorne was quickly disillusioned with Brook Farm and left after a few months, and later wrote the Blithedale romance based on his experience. No sagacious man will long retain his sagacity, he observed, and if he lived exclusively among reformers and progressive people without periodically returning into the settled system of things. Okay, so simply here, reformers has to do with these people who believe in changing the society, in finding, ways to change societies. Examples of these reformers and who were part of the what was called the Brook Farm, okay, were Margaret Fuller and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, these are the two figures who are famous for this club, and they also wanted to do a kind of reform. Okay. Other issues were debated during this period. There were women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who spoke courageously in what has been identified the first women's right convention held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And there were Indians like Chief Seath, who spoke forthrightly to a government that often seemed indifferent to the rights of Native Americans. But there is no doubt that the issue that aroused the fiercest emotions was the issue of slavery in the land of free. So here, two things are very important here. The first thing is the idea of women's right here, okay? As you can see, where is that? Katie Elizabeth, okay, who spoke in what has been identified as the first women's right convention, okay? And also, we have also things that have to do with the Indians, because the Indians at that time were not allowed to, live peacefully, and they were chased by the white Americans. They were pushed out of their countries, okay? And the last one is the slaves, okay, or the slaveries, the land of the free. Okay, so the reformers here, okay, and these members of the reformers are fighting for the women's right, the Indians' rights, and also slaves, or the slavery rights. Throughout the first half of the 19th century, tensions on the issue grew as the abolitionists of the North confronted the slave holders of the South. The Mexican War of the 1846 to 1848, though brought about by a number of causes, was viewed by abolitionists as an attempt by slavery advocates to extend slaveholding territory. And the war's treaty ceded 2/5 of Mexico, including California, to the United States. One of the most unpopular wars in American history, the Mexican War inspired indignation, resistance, especially among abolitionists. Okay, so abolitionist is a term that is very important here because it talks about those people, okay, who fight for the freedom of the slaves. Now, in the 19th century, the North, started to think of, freeing the slaves, okay, and try to find ways to free the slaves from the South, because in the South, they were agricultural society, but in the North, they were industrial society. And they wanted to free slaves so they can go to the North and work in factories, etc., etc. And there were some wars that broke out, such as the Mexican War, okay? And that Mexican War, the abolitionists believed or thought that this was part of the reform for in the country. Okay. Congressional acts frequently inflamed the controversy over slavery and often inspired outright defiance. The Fugitive Slaves Law of 1850, this is very important, compelled the return of the runaway slaves, and this is the definition, to their owners. Okay. Now, as I said, because we have the North and the South, the North wants slaves to be free, and the South did not want the slaves to be free because they want the slaves to work in their farms and plantation. The result is that there were many slaves who tried to escape from the South to the North. And there was a congressional act, okay, that stipulated the fugitive law. Now, what is the fugitive law? Any slave who escaped his master and went to the North had to be returned to his master. Okay, that's the fugitive law. Many Northerners, including Emerson and Thoreau, swore that they would not uphold this law. So many people rejected that law. Indeed, abolitionists and others in the North participated in setting up stations along Underground Railroad to assist the slaves to escape to the North and up to into Canada. The escape of slaves to Canada provided the climax for Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, the novel that Abraham Lincoln once credited with bringing on the Civil War. So this long and bitter war involved sides that appeared unevenly matched. The North had more than twice the population of the South, so the North is big, okay, and consequently more men to serve in its army. In addition, North had a strong industrial system. You see, you remember I said that the South is more agricultural and the North is more industrial. That could support both the military and the civilian population. With a few industrial and trade centers, the South was forced to buy most of its war materials from Europe, okay? Because the only way for the South to get, ammunitions and military stuff is through the North, because the North is connected to the ocean and is connected to Europe. So that's why, the South has to get, or had to get, their stuff from Europe. Although the South did not have some strategic and military advantages, it was ultimately ravaged by war that was the most costly both in human and material losses in American history. And here they are talking about the Civil War, okay? The Civil War, which costed many lives of human beings and material losses also. One of the reasons for the Civil War was the slaves and the freedom of the slaves. But okay, in the Revolutionary War, the nation was born, and in the Civil War, the country survived the severest test and came of age. The events of the period and their dates have been lifted from history and mythologized. In 1861, and this is the date of the war, the South or the Southern states seceded, and the firing on the 4th Sumter began the conflict. In the 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, and also in 1863, the Union Army won the crucial battle at Gettysburg, and Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address. So this is the time when the North won the South, okay? That's the Civil War. It started in 1861, and in 1863, that's when the proclamation freed the slaves, okay? And the Union Army here refers to the army of the North. The North, okay, the North has the army that was called the Union Army. The South, or in the South, it was called the Confederate Army. Okay, in 1864, the General Sherman made his march to the sea. Lee surrendered to the Grant at approximately on April 9, and in 1865 and on April 14, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The Civil War has proved an almost inexhaustible subject for the American imagination. It has been sung in poetry, memorialized in fiction, and endlessly reenacted on stage, screen, and television. So this is the date when the war came to an end. And Abraham Lincoln, the president of the United States at that time, was assassinated. Two great literary pairs. Okay, now we're going to literature. The selection on the following pages offer a rich sample of the American classic writers. Emerson, 14 years his senior, invited him to join the Emerson's household, earning his board and room by doing odd jobs. Thoreau read deeply in Emerson's work, and it was Emerson's idea in large part that inspired Thoreau to treat to retreat to Walden Pond for his experiment in simple living. Here they're talking about Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. These are two American writers, and they are transcendentalists. They believe in the spiritual, and they believe in the importance of the individual. So Henry David Thoreau went to a pond called Walden, and he wrote his famous work, which is called Walden 2. Although Emerson had justly been called the fountainhead of American literature, and although Thoreau looked up to Emerson, Thoreau's work enjoyed a wider reading public today. So simply because Thoreau's language was more, simple and easy to read compared to Emerson, because Emerson's essays here, as mentioned here, tend to the whole to be exclusively abstract and difficult to follow. So that's why, Henry David Thoreau was concrete and his language was easy and simple, whereas Emerson's language was abstract and difficult to follow. Thoreau's style, on the other hand, is concrete, and even as it conveys complex ideas. Okay. And here there's an example of how concrete his language is. Remember individualism. Long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove, and I am still on their trail. Readers must decide for themselves what, if anything, these items symbolize, but there is no problem conjuring a vivid image for the sentence. In their essays included here, Emerson and Thoreau exhibit many of the ideas of the transcendentalists, as well as the furious dependence and individualism that characterize the time. So remember here, the fierce independence or self-reliance and individualism. These are the characteristics of individualism. They exert from Emerson's self-reliance, and this is self-reliance, the name of the essay, represent the kind of theory that inspired Thoreau to concrete action. The excerpt from Walden and civil disobedience might be seen as an amount of Thoreau's acting out of Emerson's theory. But the works of Emerson and Thoreau included here serve to illustrate how closely related ideas may be clothed in radically different styles, and how the style can make a major difference in the impact on the reader. As with Emerson's and Thoreau, the names of Hawthorne and Melville are linked. Okay, so in the discussion of great literary pairs, okay, the first pairs that we talk about, Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Now we have a second pair. The second one is Hawthorne and Melville, and they are linked in literary history with Hawthorne advising and supporting the younger writer. Melville was 31, Hawthorne 46, when in 1850, Melville discovered that he and Hawthorne lived in a neighboring town in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts. A friendship quickly developed and they exchanged ideas and books. So this is the beginning of the relationship between these two writers. In 1850, Melville dedicated his masterpiece Moby Dick to Hawthorne. Though the novel was little noted at the time, it was gained in the 20th century a worldwide reputation that overshadows Hawthorne's masterpiece, The Scarlet Letter. As in the case of Thoreau and Emerson, the disciple unwittingly excelled the master. Here, and they refer to the two figures. Melville excelled his master, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Henry David Thoreau excelled his master, Emerson. Hawthorne and Melville are represented here by stories that show the Puritan strain in the American imagination and had not entirely faded from the scene. So these writers focus on the Puritanism, on the Puritans, and how this religion, or how this group of people, was very strict and harsh. Though neither the author could be justly labeled Puritan, they both embodied their fiction a dark view of human nature and faith. This view is obviously or obscurely symbolized by the dark forest in the young man Brown, and embedded in the fate of the title character, whose dying hours was gloom. Melville's concern is with the evil that takes from the form of social injustice and human squalor, in what Redburn saw in Lancelot's Hay. Okay, so these are two pairs, Emerson versus Thoreau, Henry Melville versus Hawthorne. Other selections in this unit convey a sense of the time and capture the flavor of American life during the 19th century. Okay, so I think this is, you don't need to know this, just skip that, skip that. Okay. Now, we have to talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was an American writer, and he was born in 1803 and died in 1882. Okay. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of the pioneers and one of the first people to talk about transcendentalism. Okay, as you can see here. So what is transcendentalism? Emerson advocated self-reliance, self-trust, and individualism, qualities that form the basis of a philosophy called transcendentalism, okay? Um, as we discussed before, he went to Harvard and studied in a Unitarian church, okay? Here, after finishing Harvard, he taught for 3 years and entered Harvard Divinity School. He was a Unitarian at the beginning, okay? But then he moved and he created his own philosophy, which is transcendentalism, okay? And here, and I'm reading here, while he was abroad, he discovered the German transcendentalism, which he brought back to this country and made distinctively American by combining his ideas of self-reliance and free man and free thinking. So here is the transcendentalism. It is something that is derived from the German transcendentalism, but has the American, sense and meaning. Transcendentalism, which focuses on self-reliance, individualism, free thinking, etc. Again, here we have also Emerson's optimistic philosophy, which stressed human goodness and intuition, was considered illogical by some and incomplete by others because it failed to account for the existence of evil in the world. Okay, so and the rest is just about his his personal life. Emerson's optimistic philosophy found in all of his writing, from the simple poem Fable to such essays as Self-Reliance and The Oversoul, which sums up in one of his new epigrams, Trust thyself, every heart vibrates to the iron string. Trust thyself, here the self-reliance, that you have to depend on yourself. Okay. Now here are some maxims of Emerson. I will explain them, and I will also explain the poem here that is called Fable, okay? I think it's too much stuff here. There are many stuff here. Anyways, we'll try to cover as many things as possible. Now, in his maxims of Emerson, here we have maxims. The first one is, speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. Here it speaks your latent conviction. It means that you have to speak up your mind. You have to tell people what you believe and what you think, okay? Because you are an individual and you have the freedom to think and be who you are. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Okay, so here it talks about society, because the opposite of society, individual. Okay, so the society does not allow individual to to rise and to be who he or she is. Okay, so he says here, society is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. It means that the society or the group is against the individual, but the transcendental philosophy believes in the individualism and rejects society. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. So it is your own mind that makes who you are, okay? Now, because of this mind, you are able to think and to act and to create. And that's the integrity of your own mind, or it's your freedom, okay? My life is for itself and not for the spectacle. I live for myself, I live for my life, and I'm not living for other people's lives. Here, this is very important. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Consistency here means that you do something, for ages. And what he means here by consistency is that we as people, we try to be consistent by following or doing what people did in the past. So we are followers, we are not creators, okay? And that's why he said that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, that if you have a little minds, then you are foolish and consistent, following what others say. And you cannot create your own life and your own philosophy. Adored, and here he said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of the mind, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divine. Here, if you look at these three things, the statements, it means that the people in politics, the ministers, the people in charge, okay? The philosophers are the people who write philosophy, and the divines, it refers to religion. So the people in power, the philosophers and the divine, you know, will not make you think, will not make you have your own mind and your own thinking. They will try to tell you what to do, okay? But they do not let you do what you want to do. That's why, for example, the statement tell you, don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this. The same thing with philosophers. When you read for philosophy, you do what they ask you to do or what they tell you to do. The same thing with religious people. An institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. Life, okay, so an institution here, the institution refers to any institution. For example, the institution of religion. Religion is an institution. And it tells you, it is about, according to Emerson, it is a lengthened shadow of one man, meaning that this institution is created by one man, and we are following that institution. And in this case, we are not free, because we are followers. We are followers of that institution, which was the shadow of one man. But he believes that every one of us must have his own and her own thinking and his or her own institution. Life only avails not the having lived. So life only avails means that you have to think of the life now, but not the past, the having lived. The having lived refers to the past, to the people who died. So should we follow the people who died and do what they ask us to do, or we have to live our life now and create our own, you know, life? Insist on yourself, never imitate. And this is very good also. Insist on yourself means that you have to create, you have to be creative. Never imitate, never follow people. Don't see what people do and try to imitate them, but create your own life. The civilized man has built a couch, but has lost the use of his feet. The last line talks about the civilized man, and the civilized man refers to any one of us here. Okay, so the civilized man has built a couch, but has lost the use of his feet, means that we as people, we are civilized people, right? And we depend on the built couch. So we depend on the car, on the phone, on everything that is made. But this makes us lazy, okay? So we use the couch, but we don't use our feet, and this makes us more lazy, and this has negative thing. So what he wants us to do is to be more active, more individual, and try to do things that we want to do, and not just to depend on other people, but we have to depend on ourselves. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here because I gave you too much stuff and I cannot continue, and I'm feeling tired now. So thank you very much, guys, for listening, and have a wonderful day.